Hello. Hello, everybody. Hello, team.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm good over here. Ready to learn about some compost.
Is there a reason we have doubled Amelias?
What do you mean?
Do you have two Amelias bubbles on your screens?
Oh yeah, that's because I'm screen sharing on the other one. But, yeah.
I'm still only seeing the ECM at oh, okay, never mind. Now I see it.
Okay.
No.
I'm going to use it when people are hopping on the game. If people are hopping on the game. So if you guys are playing and it's like, wow, they're waiting forever, it's because if anyone's typing, we'll have to deal with that lag. But other than that, it should be pretty fun.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great. I'm already having fun and it hasn't even started.
Hopefully, we can hope. Here's to the best. I think it's about time to rock and roll on our first intro game. Is everyone ready? I'm pretty excited to share this one with you. Alright, so if you can see the very beautiful screen, today we're going to be playing a game called Brown, Green, or Garbage, and it's kind of about composting, which is kind of one of the themes for this episode. And so when we're making compost, we're utilizing microbes in the soil. That's what's actually breaking down a lot of those food products. And microbes, they really like a certain carbon to nitrogen ratio, and that ratio is somewhere around 30 to 1. Some places will say 25 to 1, but somewhere in that range. So they like a lot more carbon to nitrogen. And when you're making a compost bin, I guess in like a perfect world, you would do all the math and calculate like the mass of how many grass clippings I'm putting in, what's the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and punch it all out. But in practice, it's really just a good thing to not necessarily get this perfect, but to kind of keep in mind when you're adding nitrogen-rich things and when you're adding things that have less nitrogen, so you can kind of balance. And so when we talk about composting, we talk about green things, and green things are those things that have a lot of nitrogen in them still. And then we talk about brown things, which are things that have a lot of carbon in them, so that when we add them to our compost bin, we have just a small reference point to know kind of where our bin's at in terms of carbon to nitrogen. So green things, high in nitrogen. I'm going to give you guys a hint on this one. It's called green for a reason. I'll just leave that there. Browns are lower in nitrogen. There's another hint there with the photo. And then garbage. So garbage is things that we shouldn't put in a compost bin, either because it won't break down, like plastic, it's not going to turn into soil. And so we're going to hop in. So I'm going to show you an item, and you're going to guess whether it's green, which is high in nitrogen, if it's brown, which is low in nitrogen, or if you shouldn't put it in the bin. You guys ready?
I was born for this.
Okay. Alright.
Let's do it.
Vegetable scraps.
So, is it this particular image, like a carrot, or just vegetables?
Just vegetable scraps. So this could be like the carrot, or like, I have some lettuce. Broccoli, I'm trying to think of other vegetables. Radishes, those are a thing right now.
They're pretty hot right now.
I put a lot of radishes in my compost. radish rich compost.
Oh, that's funny. You did choose compost radishes.
Yeah, I don't like radishes. It's bad. I've tried so many times. Yeah.
Alright, what are you guys thinking? Green, brown, or garbage?
I mean, I don't think it's garbage. I think I'm going to say that.
I think you're on the right track.
That's cool. David, do you have...
I'm going to say brown.
You're going to say brown? That's bold. Because
There's always a
clearly
dissenting
a green
opinion.
top on it.
I'll be the wrong one out if it's okay.
Okay. I like that you went for that. Like you just leaned into that really hard. I'm going to go for greens. I'm going to go for green.
Yeah,
Alright,
yeah, I'm also going to go with green.
I feel safe when Mary's on my team. No offense, Dave.
very compost queen. Alright, so these green. So they have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 25:1. And so that's slightly lower than the 30:1 that you kind of want in your bin. So that's why it's considered nitrogen rich. Are you ready for the next one?
Absolutely, I'm on a roll.
Fruit scraps. So apple, berries. That's all the fruits I can think of right now.
Pear.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good one.
If anybody in the chat wants to play along, you're more than welcome to.
Please do. Please do.
Jump in, the more the merrier. Someone jumped in. I don't know who it was. That's...
Oh man, somebody's gonna call something that's real buzzy.
Fruit scraps, I'm going to go with green again, just because there's a green image in the picture, but it could be something else. It's not garbage. That I can say that much as well.
I don't know. There's some pretty garbage fruits out there.
There are some garbage.
Name one garbage fruit.
The durian.
Oh, yeah, I don't like durian. But apparently if you get it right off the tree, it's okay.
I've never had a dragon fruit that I liked.
Okay, guys, you ready? So what's the guesses? We have a green from the chat. What are you guys going with?
Oh, I'll have to go green on this one. I was wrong last time.
Okay. Ready?
No.
It's brown!
No! That's so fun!
Yeah. Fruit apparently just has a lot more carbon in it. I actually did some Googling on this one, and I couldn't find why vegetables have so much more nitrogen compared to fruit. So if anyone knows that, but I thought this was kind of a fun thing. So I guess if you just eat like a balanced fruit and vegetable, like your compost bin will come out the ones that 45, ones 65.
My guess would be, that's really cool. My guess would be the amount of
Oh yeah, because sugars are carbohydrate. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's just my guess. I don't know that for sure.
David, you were right on this one. That's...
Alright, I'm gonna continue on our food scrap thing, and now I have meat scraps.
I know the answer.
They're garbage. They should have been eaten.
I don't know the answer. Yeah, I'm assuming it's going to go in the garbage. Unless you want, like, little friends in your compost. And by friends, I mean large friends.
Yeah, I'm also saying garbage.
Alright. Yeah, it's kind of dumb that some sources, that if you like buried it, like really carefully, it wasn't on the surface, that you could possibly compost it. Honestly, feed it to a dog. So much easier. I don't put it there.
So, like very large stuff, like the one at the North Farm here at KC, they're of it being like a commercially sized one for decompose okay. The typical compost like that's it's
I yeah. Dry leaves. This was something that me and David actually picked up from the parking lot yesterday.
Your heroes really for doing that. I'm gonna go with browns.
Yeah, I gotta go with brown too, and not just for the color.
yeah, brown.
Yeah, it's like one of the most common mistakes you can set it in like wood chips. Right. Manure. Oh, that's gross.
I don't put it in the garbage, but I'm sure you can save it for something. I don't.
Yeah, people really like putting manure in their compost. That's definitely not garbage.
Well, that's neat. I'm a bad compost.
Now we're all learning. Mary, David?
Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm troubleshooting a little bit at the moment.
Alright, that's better. It is green! Yay! It's actually one of the most green things there is. Poop has a lot of it's just have like last this is another thing that we have around here a lot, and I'm sure most people have sitting around in their yard.
I feel like you pick some ones that are really hard. Like I don't think you were like, you know what? I mean, for someone who's not an expert with a panel of experts.
I didn't want to do like wood. It's like
Sure. No. I'm not critiquing you. I've learned a lot because I don't know. Like,
yeah. Also, there's like really good resources out there to find this. Like have not only green or brown, but I'd recommend a green or brown. The green kind of brown, but with the manure, it was like really neat. And the leaves were really brown. Do you have any guesses on this one?
I mean, grass is green and then it becomes brown. So.
We're gonna say these are like pretty practical things. Like you mow it, you got the bag, and then you dump the bag.
Okay. Mary, what do you think?
So I'm gonna say green. Some people have said like not. Well, yeah, I'm gonna say green.
I feel like that's fine for me. Although like brown is gonna make folks feel like better to have an opposite, but grass after it's cut is green.
Yeah, it is green. Yay!
Good job, Mary.
Yay! Good job, Christian. Good job, Paul.
These are great questions. Thanks, Amelia.
Yeah, no problem. I think we're going to transition into kind of an introduction segment now. So Christian's going to be signing off. Thanks for joining us for our game.
This was so fun.
And then you'll get to meet kind of the people that are going to be the same location.
Alright, see ya.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Alright. Discussion view. It's all manual sometimes.
It's okay, David. Keep believing him. David is our fabulous tech person that helps us be able to do things like this.
I don't know about fabulous. I don't even know if the stream is going smoothly at this point.
Yeah. Always appreciated, I think.
Okay, give me just 1 second. Let's see. Amelia, you've been blue for a while now, so.
Yeah, I got a call from my grandma, and it put the Skype on hold to dismiss the call from my grandma, and I'm back on the call, but it hasn't let me back in my video face. So I'm gonna toggle that real quick, but if not, I can just be the blue box.
Oh no, I think I've got you back.
Oh, cool. Hi guys, I'm back. Sorry I had to miss you guys for a whole 2 minutes. Ooh.
And Sweetie is saying things are a little choppy.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed as well. I'm seeing we're skipping frames every once in a while. Quite a lot, actually. So let's see. I can't run that.
I'm back.
Okay. I may have just needed to run a 2-computer setup here instead of trying to run off one. That may have been my problem, and I did not solve it in time.
Well, is our sound okay? I feel like if our sound is okay, we could still talk about sustainable kitchen and do a little bit of an introduction while we're fixing up the.
Yeah, everyone in the chat, how's our sound quality? Is that skipping a bit, or is that pretty
Perfect. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just talk for a minute. Let me go grab the other laptop.
Okay. Mary, do you want to start with introductions?
Yeah, it said sound is skipping. But I guess we'll just kind of, I don't know, I feel like we should go ahead still rather than wait a long time. I don't know if that's, what's your thoughts on that? Flashing.
I say just repeat every fifth syllable, so that when it skips, it just cancels it all out.
Okay. So this is the first episode of Sustainable Kitchen with ECM at K-State. So this is going to be our summertime series, and kind of building off of what we have been doing with Real Food Live, talking about, how to cook sustainably, how to, use kind of whole food ingredients, blah, 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 blah. But, so this kind of is going to be the other element where we want to talk about different aspects of the food system, gardening, growing your own food, and how to, especially because food is such a huge component of leading a sustainable life and reducing our impact on the world, kind of different elements that we can just come on here and chat about and hopefully have some fun. to, talk about these things that sometimes the end of the world can seem a little bit grim, but we just want to have some fun and spread some knowledge about that. So, I guess we can talk about who we are as people. Is that a part of the introductions that we want to do?
If you want to, yeah.
Okay, I'm Mary, I guess.
Mary.
I'm the Real Food Lunch coordinator intern at ECM, and I've worked there since beginning of last semester. And I've gone to ECM intermittently the past couple of years, but more and more frequently, probably in the past year and a half, around then. And so I graduated in December with my degree in horticulture production, and I got the secondary major of natural resources and environmental science. And I care a lot about sustainable food and kind of, I don't know, the intersection of that and food security and talking about local food systems and blah, 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 blah. So I'm really excited for this, and yeah. That's it.
Alright. Do you want to go next, or do you want me to go next, David?
Go ahead and go next. I didn't have the stream audio on. I was trying to make sure things were running smoothly.
Okay, cool. Hello. I'm Amelia. I'm currently a biology student here at K-State. Hooray! Like Mary, I'm also an intern here at ECM. And in terms of food, I think my biggest thing is I do a lot of volunteer work out at the K-State Student Farm, which does a lot with organic farming. And the really cool thing is I've gotten to see and help with the food growing there, and then I come to ECM and we do a lot of work with some of their blemished produce, or produce they can't sell. We turn that into our real food lunches, and so that's kind of my background.
Nobody heard a word I just said in the stream, did they? You two could hear me, but I'm pretty sure I had my mic muted.
Oh no!
Yep. Well, that's unfortunate. I had it muted so I could listen to the stream and make sure we weren't reverberating too badly.
Yeah, for all of you in the stream who can't hear David, he just gave us his superhero backstory, but he's gonna re-give it.
So I'll re-say everything I just said, which was kind of a summed up version and a more summed up version. That's sad. Thanks, Rev1. Thank you.
Now give us the full version with deep ominous music and everything.
What? Ominous music? I don't have that functionality right now.
That's
okay. But regardless, like I said, I moved in upstairs 2.5 years ago, and they asked me to start cleaning the place and kind of opening up the doors and just doing random jobs around here because they needed to get done. And then they started asking me to do other things, and then other things, and then other things, and now I'm running a stream as well as, among other things, still cleaning, but running a stream now, which is odd. So there's, like I said, no linear translation to any of that. It just all sort of just one step was a misstep into the other, if you want to say that, I guess. But now I'm doing this, and I have no background in any of this ECM stuff before I moved here, so I guess I'm the odd one out.
We appreciate you just for who you are. Wonderful. So with that, do we want to move on to the next segment where I'm going to do it?
Yeah.
Or do we need more time? Okay.
Nope, I think it's up to you.
Okay. It might take me kind of a moment, and I'm going to unplug my, hopefully
It's fine.
This will.
Well, I'll keep it on the screen so everyone can just laugh at me for a few more seconds before you're ready.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab my laptop, so if there's any comments or questions, I can post them. Just 1 minute.
Well, I don't know. On a scale of 1 to 10 smooth running, I'd say we're about at a 4 or a 5 right now, but honestly, that's not a disaster, so I'll take it.
I put my laptop in now. I'm gonna get a thing of wasabi peas because life is always better with wasabi peas. You can quote me on. Whoa. Okay. So this episode we want to talk about kind of the life cycle of food, or the circle of food, and kind of how to incorporate sustainability into that, because there's so much more to food than picking it up at the grocery store and munching away on it. So I kind of thought we could do a diagram of food, going through food. So I suppose the easiest place to start is kind of thinking about, when you think about like a conventional, maybe somebody who's working a full-time job, they're trying their best, and so they're not being super intentional about their food, but they're leading a life that reflects the
Mary, we can't really see your face. We can't really see your face. Was that intentional?
I mean, it is what it is.
Okay.
Can you see my face here? Is it okay?
Yeah, it's a little better, yeah.
I guess just somebody who's not very incorporated with the food system, how they might, their linear progression of the food, starting with the landfill being the ending point. And this is definitely something that we want to avoid. Amelia is going to talk much more about landfills, but we'll kind of touch on it here. God, that was like a really intense look from Amelia. So food ends up in the landfill when it is that system, when you're not being intentional, when you're just throwing it in the garbage. The thing with food in the landfill is that landfills don't really create a system for any decomposition to happen. I remember I don't know how, take this with a grain of salt. I remember my AP environmental science teacher in high school saying, like, they've dug up newspapers from 100 years ago from landfills, if that makes you kind of think about. Things that go into landfills are never going away. However, the lack of oxygen in landfill systems creates methanogenesis and methane, which is a much more potent gas than carbon dioxide. So landfills are just something to avoid. But before landfills, we have to eat it. Eat that food. And so this could go more into diets. The typical American diet is quite reliant on meat for a lot of our nutrients and a lot of our protein, and different things like that. There's certain nutrients that we don't tend to focus on, and we really love that protein. We really got to get all that protein. So we can talk more into that, I suppose. And so prior to eating food, which there's kind of a side, we'll say grocery store. And I'm going to run out of space here because I don't plan things well and I'm a mess. But so obviously most people purchase their food from the grocery store. On average, I was reading earlier, the average total meal accumulated, the American meal, has has 1,500 miles attached to it to just create that one meal. A lot of our produce, especially in the earlier parts of the year, is coming from Mexico or Central or South America, which is obviously quite carbon heavy when you consider that much transportation. It's also, even maybe if it is produced more locally, there's this added step which could be going to a factory for more processed foods, which is when we're going to get the incorporation of a lot of stuff that we can't compost, like plastic, like packaging, which obviously we're all seeing tremendous issues with in these years of, you know, our food system is set up to where people don't really, I mean, you can, like, it's very important to try to avoid packaging and things like that, but our food system is set up where, especially when you consider subsidies and what food is affordable, and there's a lot of packaging involved, and the average American family is going to consume a lot of factory produced food, which is most likely less healthy and also creating more waste in the process, waste that is not food or organically based. And then coming from the start is the farm. So there's kind of that. Can you see that okay? Let me know if you let me know if this is like not visible. I can't really tell.
Yeah, we can see it. It's good.
It's good? Okay. So yeah, starting from the farm, as I said, a lot of the farm food coming from like Mexico, Central South America, has a lot of miles attached to it. There's also always the question when you should be consuming food of like, where did this food come from? What sort of conditions are they coming from? You know, we know palm oil, obviously, that's a big one when we consider the rainforest deforestation. There's also a lot of human rights issues with a lot of like chocolate production, coffee production, things like that, that you always want to be aware of and mindful of and know where you are producing or where you are, what you are consuming, where that is coming from. And so there's also this part of farming that, you know, comes back into the diet of like, am I eating 100% beef all the time? Like, if you are, your carbon footprint might be a little bit much, you know, and as well as industrial agriculture that requires a lot of carbon inputs through tractors and through, you know, transportation, through the processing, through combines. It's all a lot, and that's not to say that if you shop from a small farm that it's all peachy and clean and there's no issues with it, because there are always certain things that you should question or make sure or consider, but just as a point. So yeah, I suppose with that, then I kind of wanted to do the intro and then maybe just touch on like, okay, so this doesn't seem like a great option. Like there's carbon on all these steps, and there's always going to be carbon on all the steps because we like you can't just not emit carbon dioxide. But how do we reduce these different elements? So I wanted to just kind of go through and just give like a few tips or ideas of how can we reduce at each of these steps, and also potentially, you know, improve our community support locally, which, you know, all of the just generally more economically sustainable, socially sustainable, and environmentally sustainable. We want to consider all of these things when we're talking about food. So yeah, so farming, you know, you could say I get my wheat, even if you are, we could consider like industrialized produced wheat, it's still local. That's probably better than wheat that's coming from, I don't know, Russia, wherever they grow wheat. I don't know why I would get wheat from Russia. But so shopping local is one thing that I think is really important, because it's not just reducing your carbon, but it is also helping to support local people and the people that surround you, and improving the community and all of those fun things. So shopping local, and I guess one thing to think about is transparency of the production, whether that be, they produce organic or permaculture, or like clean and green, which is kind of a way for USDA certifications can be expensive for a lot of folks. So small farms don't always do that. So if you have a clean and green label, I used to work for a farm that would label themselves as that, and that's a way to for them to kind of identify, like, hey, we do not use these factory produced chemicals, but we also support the organic mentality without having that certification, because it's not always feasible with small farmers. So transparency, I guess, and a part of that is like how their production means, I suppose. What are their, typically small farms are going to have less carbon inputs. They'll still, use a tractor and things, but it's not so much high. And there's also the transportation affiliated with that. So anything that's coming 1,500 miles in a refrigerated thing is going to be a lot different from coming from down the road in a truck. Although they have created it quite efficiently. Like, transportation is efficient to the point where transportation, I was reading, was only about 10% on average of the total emissions for most food that you get. So this looks like a hot mess, I feel like, at this point. I thought it was going to look cute and organized, but maybe that's just not the case. Yeah, so we'll go down here, I guess. So there is a grocery store. So at the grocery store, I shop at Dillon's. They'll have like I'm local labels, and I always like to try to go for, maybe the local potatoes instead of the not local potatoes, because I guess, I'm sending a message to them that, hey, I want these, voting with my pocket, voting with my money, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. So there, but also for their farmers markets are a great way to support people who are trying to make a living off of growing food and all that. And furthermore, if you have the capability of growing any of your own food, obviously food that comes from right outside my house is going to have the lowest footprint of them all, because it doesn't even have to get in a truck. But obviously, you want to be mindful of not everyone is able to grow their own food. Not everyone has the time, and there is some privilege associated with having enough land, having enough time, all of those things to grow your own food. So then we move on to eating that food and preparing it, and what our diet consists of. As much as we know that, like, eating greens and eating veggies and all that is potentially, lost my train of thought. Even though we know that, like, obviously those are healthy and important and need to be a part of our diet, the typical American diet doesn't always prioritize that. But it's also coming from and the carbon emissions that specific different types of food. Obviously, we know that, like, beef is, like, it's pretty bad as far as percentage of emissions wise, because of the methanogenesis that occurs within cattle and the amount of water that's needed to produce the feed and then turn around and give it to the cows. It's very energy intensive, and so that's something to be mindful of. One thing that I have always kind of, maybe not always for sure, but like one thing to do is just kind of like think through maybe the ethics, I suppose. Maybe, I don't know if that's the best way of saying that, but like reading ingredients, maybe that's a better thing to put. I'll put that instead, because I don't really know where I was going with that point, but it just seemed like a smart thing to put. So read ingredients, which can also go back. So maybe at this point we're buying from, the farmer's market, and we're not doing that. But the grocery store I also meant to put avoid packaged or processed stuff. Packed, whatever. And, this isn't gonna, nobody is perfect at this. I just ate a bunch of wasabi peas because they're delicious. But, even when it's like getting broccoli that comes in a plastic bag or doesn't come in a plastic bag, just go for the one that's not in a plastic bag. So with eating the food, I like to read the ingredients. I like to look for potential palm oil derivatives, different things like that. And also just being mindful of what foods specifically are less carbon intensive. If you are going to eat meat, chicken is relatively low on that, lower than like dairy, I think. So things like that. So creating a balanced diet around that. And then what can we do instead of a landfill? Well, then it comes into the hierarchy that's posted by the EPA. Let me look at what it's called. I don't know. There's some, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? There's like the hierarchy of food diversion. So first of all, instead of a landfill, we need to be thinking about the people that our food that we do not eat could feed. Obviously, there is certainly a lot of have and have-nots in our country, and there are a lot of people that, plenty of food banks, things, and obviously there's regulations and stuff, but diverting first, food that is not being eaten by you should first go to people that need it. If it's unacceptable for people to eat, whether that be because it's contaminated or whatever, then finding ways for animals to eat it is the next best thing, rather than, maybe not feeding it, like, giving your animal not food. You know what? Never mind. You know what I'm saying. I don't know how to say that. Then if animals can't do it or can't eat it, then we want to go into composting. So composting, because of the system it creates an oxygen-rich environment where methane is not going to be produced, or if it is produced, it's going to be in small pockets. So composting is a great way to reduce that impact, as well as it's just so crazy to not compost all the beautiful, rich, nitrogen and carbon-rich things in our world. Like, we just got to do that, and then turn it around and put it right back into the garden as a soil amendment. It's just super important. There's different, if you live in certain towns, they might have a way to donate compost. The Riley County Transfer Station does have a lot of compost, but that might not necessarily be. I don't know how. I feel like generally that's like for large quantities. I don't know. I guess you could go and try to like take your little 5-gallon bucket of food scraps. But I've also done things, and we're going to talk about compost, blah, 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 different composting systems. So then composting. The only thing that you want to do, I guess, when it comes to landfills is like contaminated food. Or if, as we said, like meat, if you do not have access to a large enough facility, then it goes to landfills. But we don't like landfills because they're so bad and they're just the bullies of everything. Not about landfills. So maybe I just talked for way too long. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like I just kind of wanted to go through and maybe give some tips and ideas of like how we can think through sustainable choices when we're eating food. And I'm sorry that yeah. Yep.
We don't have any questions in the chat currently, but we'll give it a second because the stream lags like about I don't know 20 to 30 seconds right now. So
Okay.
if there's one coming in, I'll let you know.
Okay. I don't know if that was too general or too specific, or I just added a lot of unnecessary details in it, but I just feel like I talked about that. Yeah. So kind of just thinking about how to disrupt the norm. Ooh.
No, that was perfect, Mary. Absolutely perfect. All right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it doesn't look like we've got any questions coming in. So, do we want to move on to the next bit?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. The next bit should be Amelia talking about compost versus landfills. And she will go into much more detail of some of the things I touched on and just do beautiful things. Amazing. I'm handed it to you, Amelia.
It's going to lag for a few seconds, so I won't be on screen for a little bit, so I'll wait. But like Mary said, I'm going to touch on a little bit of what happens to your food in a compost bin versus what happens to it at a landfill. Specifically, what outputs you get from that food waste. And so to start, a lot of my research came from the EPA. They have a lot of good resources on that if anyone is extra interested. And so I'm just going to read 2 of their paragraphs about food waste. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes, they can hear you.
Awesome. I might just be a black screen for this, but that's okay. So the EPA, under a title called Why is Sustainable Management of Food Important? It claims that wasted food is a growing problem in our modern society and an untapped opportunity. In 2017 alone, almost 41 million tons of food waste were generated, and only 6.3% of that was diverted from the landfills. So that means that over like 93.7% of that 41 million tons, which I can't do in my head, I'm sorry guys, ended up in the landfills. It goes on to say that it's about 22% of the waste that comes from cities, and so our Riley County food waste, or our Riley County solid waste, like most of that, or like almost a quarter of that's food. And so with so much food going to landfills, it's kind of important to know what happens to that food in a landfill, especially since it's actually a really big environmental problem. So when food breaks down in a landfill, it's under anaerobic conditions, so it doesn't have oxygen. And so microbes that break down these food waste are different microbes that would break down in like a compost bin that you're turning and giving oxygen to. And so what happens is a process called anaerobic respiration, and by these methanogenic microbes. And so they produce methane as one of the huge byproducts. And so all of this plant matter or organic matter is turned into carbon dioxide and methane. So carbon dioxide will happen regardless of how you break down food. It's normal, it's a healthy part of the food cycle. The problem is that methane. So methane is has a global warming potential of around 25. The EPA says it's actually around 28 or 36, which is very concerning. But what that value means is that for every molecule of methane in the atmosphere, it does the work of about 25 carbon dioxide molecules in terms of global warming, which is concerning. And this methane from landfills is the third largest output of methane because of humans in the US. And there are a few landfills. Apparently, according to the EPA, there's about 500, a little more than 500, that capture that methane and use it as an energy source, which is super cool. But as you probably know, there's way more than 500 landfills in the US, and so most of that food waste that's going to landfills is turning into methane and carbon dioxide, which ends up in the atmosphere. On the other hand, when we do compost, depending on how you're composting, if you're composting with worms, that food will go through the worm guts, gets broken up, and then microbes will team at it, and you'll get a mix of, you'll still get carbon dioxide because those microbes have to respire. Normal part of the carbon cycle, perfectly fine. But instead of that methane, you'll get just like organic molecules that are soil now that you can turn into a really awesome substrate to grow more plants. And so you get food out of it instead of this really harmful global warming gas. So that's landfills versus compost.
I mean, outside of taking on a ton of trash, is there really any benefit to landfills? I'm just curious.
I'm trying to think. Landfills, like, for a society, they can be really, like, that waste management service is really good at monitoring, like, possible contamination sources, because to have a landfill, you have to make sure that you have to monitor the water around it, you have to monitor the soil around it, and it's not perfect, like you'll still get leaches and it's still a harmful thing, but it's like a monitored harmful thing, so it's better than just like throwing batteries in your backyard. But I mean, on the flip side of that, it's also a very expensive service. I forget the numbers. I looked it up like a couple months ago for the Riley County, how much it costs us to maintain, but they have to spend a lot of money to do that portion of it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Does anybody in the stream have any questions? Guess we kind of gotta wait for a second.
Yeah, it's not ideal. I wish it wasn't so laggy, but so be it.
Yeah, I'll work on that. That's something I need to get working here. I think I think I loaded this computer down with too much stuff to start, and then it doesn't want to change the latency now that it's in the middle of the stream.
That's okay. We'll forgive it this time.
Okay, thanks. Alright, well, it doesn't look like anybody has any real questions, or any questions at all, I should say. So, do we want to move on to showing off our various compost piles?
Yes. Now that we've talked about how cool compost is compared to landfills, I think Mary's going to show off the compost at her house so we can see what she does. And then I'll show off the one here at ECM so you can see what we do with some of our food waste.
Mary, I'm unable to hear you.
Sorry, I had my microphone muted for while Amelia was talking. So I'm making my way into the backyard. they are having the neighbor dinner out here, so I'm not sure if there will be sounds, but this is we have let me turn around the camera, that might be best option. You can see how kind of crazy everything is. So this is our new and improved 3-bay compost system for our 4-person household, for sometimes being more than that. So the idea behind this compost system is basically to have one that is new things that we're disposing of, then one bay that is in the process of decomposing, and then one that will eventually be finished compost, but since this is new, this is where we're storing our leaves, which is our primary carbon source. So for the most part, we leave a pitchfork and a shovel out here, so whenever we're pouring green into it, we'll come over here, we'll just get a couple of shovels of the browns, and we will take just scoop some over into here and make sure that everything is covered. So this is our second round, I suppose, of compost. We built this out of wood pallets that were in the neighbor's backyard. Maybe March, February, a couple months ago. So we are still learning a lot about this. I have never managed like this large of a compost system, really. I've had small, like 5-gallon buckets inside of my various apartments before, but not something as big as this. So I'm gonna pull back and see. I haven't looked at the in process compost in a while, so we can maybe dig a bit and see how that's going in comparison to the fresh, newly dumped compost. So I turned this maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was I don't know how I'm gonna do this while holding it, but maybe let's see if I can. Can you see that okay? I feel like that's as good as we're gonna get. So this is what the in-process compost looks like. You can see that it is primarily a lot of the greens, if you will, have decomposed, and it's mostly looking like, kind of rotten, wet leaves. We got some little critters and different fungi going on in here. But this is generally where it'll get really warm. It'll heat up and it'll do a lot of the undisturbed. It'll start to rapidly decompose some of that stuff. I'm trying to make it so you guys can see very well. Oop! I dropped you. So yeah, this is a mix of, it's mostly, our food scraps from in the kitchen, as well as garden scraps from our garden, and then the leaves, as I said. We have a lot of eggshells because we have chickens. So yeah, all sorts of a whole variety. We don't do this with a system of this size. We do eggshells, but we don't do eggs. We don't do really any animal products because of the proteins will be, I think, more difficult to break down, as well as encouraging pests. So, and I mean, like, as Christian said, large friends to come and visit. So yeah, this is it. It's mostly plant-based stuff that is decomposing, and then we kind of just put this bit of a pallet like that on top of it to just kind of say, hey, don't touch that. So I'll show the new compost a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to Amelia. So we tend to do layers, and we try to cover all greens with this. You can see there's a banana peel, maybe some green beans, I think, stuff like that. So yeah, we pretty much, every time we dump a little bit, we want to make sure to cover it up, because that's going to help deter rodents. And with the carbon-rich stuff, it's going to help decompose faster. So this is, I should say, this stuff is really smelly. This stuff, not smelly. Not smelly at all, because it's mostly decomposed. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much what I had to say about our compost system. It's new, we're still learning a lot, but it's been really, I mean, it's large enough to the point where, like, you know, it's pretty easy. Like, we don't have to really worry about space being an issue. We got the space. So yeah, that's our compost system. Does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna go back inside to see the chat.
I mean, I do have one question. You mentioned it, like eggshells and like not necessarily meat products, but what about, say, like manure? Could you add like the whatever you muck out of your chicken coop and put it in there? Mary, can you hear me at all? I'm going to assume she can't actually hear me. Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to Amelia then. All right.
Alrighty, so I'm at ECM, and I'm going to show you the worm bin we have. That's our composting system. So here it is. Boom, 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 boom. This is it. As you can see, it's made out of 2 cat litter bins, and it's pretty small considering that we're a full-size organization that cooks on a weekly basis. So we don't use this for all of our food scraps. We actually send a lot to Mary's house. But this is something we do use for mostly like fruits and veggies and things like that. So inside you can see we have some greens right here. And then in these kinds of bins, you also want to balance green and brown. And the brown, we actually use things like paper. Like this is, I think this is some homework, because it looks like engineering paper. But worms will also eat this, and they really like it for bedding. And so in here, underneath all this, you can see there's lots of really nice dirt. That's all worm poop. And it's gonna be hard to find worms because they don't like the light very much. But they're all under there, eating away. And so when we add new things, the worms will eat them pretty quick. And worms, like chickens, they have little gizzards in their digestive system. And so that breaks everything into little bits. And then the microbes can get at those little bits a lot quicker than they can a full-size leaf. And so that's kind of what happens with that. Now, as you can see, we have worm poop all over. Da, 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 da. And then, if I can get them apart, underneath, water kind of drips through there. That's all liquid. And that is really high in carbon and nitrogen. And it's like an excellent fertilizer that you can use on top of the just plain dirt that's created. Does anyone have any questions about a worm bin?
I've got one. I mean, what can't you put in that small, like, recycle bin that you could maybe in Mary's?
I was gonna ask, so maybe what are some things that we would put in, like, my larger scale one that we don't put in the worm bin?
Yeah, so worms are kind of pickier because they won't necessarily eat everything. So you have to be careful with onions. I think that's the biggest thing, because onions are really popular to cook with, but worms won't eat them. But other things that, like eggshells, that you put in your big bin, you'd also put in this bin, or coffee grounds. Some of those things, worms actually need more than those big bins. Either those coffee grounds or those eggshells, because those are hard things, and that's like what they use in their gizzards. Obviously, you want to crush them up before you put them in. Also, things like meat, don't try and put meat in a worm bin, or citrus. They don't like citrus either. So things like that.
So, like, don't put oranges, or just don't put orange peels, or
I think so,
like,
yeah.
what exactly do you mean by citrus? Like, basically any citrus at all?
That was my question.
Yeah, I'd say avoid kind of any citrus, like the peels, the fleshy part of it. All of that has the same problem with the acidity.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of the same in our compost system of, like, you can maybe put a little bit in, but because we have such alkaline soils, that really citrus is just so acidic that it'll drop that pH really quickly, so it's important to avoid that in a non-worm compost system.
I feel like the longer I've been composting, I guess my notion of compost before I ever had to like work with a bin or something, it's like, oh, it's like the pile you put stuff in and it magically turns into dirt, but it's more like taking care of like the worms or taking care of the microbes that do that work for you.
That's a really
And
good
so
point. Yeah.
they're like your little pets.
Yeah. I feel the same way about my sourdough starter. Like,
Aww.
nurture it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like the magic jar that makes yeast or your bread bubble. It's your pet. What is that? Yeast. Is it?
Yeah.
What is sourdough?
Yeah. Yeah, sourdough is yeast. It's
Okay,
apparently
so it's your
the
pet
yeast
yeast.
yeah, it's the yeast that's like pretty present really everywhere, and it's just the water that kind of accelerates it. So I don't think that there's really, I don't know. Sure, I'm sure there's bacteria in it, but
I do have another question.
yep.
Are there things where you can put in, like, in small amounts that are good for the system, but if you, like, overdo it, will just kill everything? Like, I guess
had some
alcohol for humans is the
statistics that I
idea.
had written down that I didn't read aloud earlier, and I was gonna maybe read them now. That 80% of greenhouse gases that come from the food system are from the land use and from farming. So really, in relation to that, the transportation isn't actually that much, but it's still something to think about. And yeah, 13.7 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalents comes from the land worldwide. Did you read that same one? Maybe you read that one same. That's
Maybe.
wild.
I probably read it. I don't know if I read it on the stream. But David had a really good question. I don't know, Mary, if you heard it. But
Oh,
his
I couldn't
question was,
hear.
are there things that you can put in a compost bin that are good in small bits, but if you put too much in, it's a problem? I would say, kind of going back to our game at the very beginning, if you put like only like really, really green things in there, or only really, really brown things in there, like those things are really healthy in a normal system. But if you overdo one or the other, it starts to get kind of hurtful.
Yeah, I would agree that there's a balance to it.
Can you think of anything else other than just the brown and green thing? I feel like there's something out there.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of citrus, which we kind of already touched on.
Yeah.
Too much citrus can be damaging. I'm assuming that also, I don't know what you would put. I can't think of anything that has like an excessively high pH, but if you were to also put something with a really high pH, it would also off balance that. I don't know what that would be.
Do coffee grounds have a really? Oh, you're basic. High pH is basic. I guess
Yeah.
so pouring baking soda into your compost bin. That might not be the best.
That's what I do every day. And just
I just go for a box of Arm & Hammer.
yeah.
All right. If there's no more questions, I think we're about ready to wrap up our first episode, guys.
Woo! Yay!
High fives all around.
And I'll hop us over to... There we go. Now everyone can see us again. Alright, cool. Yeah. So, does anybody in the stream have any questions? Do we have any big important messages that need to go out?
My only thing is, see us on Thursday, guys. On Thursdays, we cook. And if you're in the Manhattan, Kansas area and you want to cook along, you can order an ingredient bag and you can get all of the ingredients that we'll use in the stream earlier that day and then hop on the stream and cook with us. So that's my big announcement.
Okay, cool. Mary, you have anything?
I don't think so. I think I'm just...
The Rev one, sorry, I'm cutting you off here. The Rev one wants to ask you, what's it like to be amazing?
It's too much.
It's too much? Are you sure about that?
No. I mean, like, that's too much of a question. Not that it's too much to be amazing.
Okay. I feel like it really asks you to explore your inner feelings and emotions, and that's a lot to do on like an hour and 30-minute stream.
Yeah. For the next 15 minutes, we're just gonna really emotional.
Do a silent meditation.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like the Rev one's got another question for us.
All right, ask it, Rev one.
Are they just gonna ask the same question?
I'm gonna get the rest of my face on this. Sorry, guys. Ah, there we go.
Well, I mean, I thought they had a question, but they're kind of leaving me hanging here, or maybe their question earlier was the one. Who knows?
That's okay, Rev one. If anyone comes up with any questions throughout the week, go ahead and save those for the beginning of our next stream, and we can answer them then. Oh, there we go. There's our question. The question is, what are the things I need to start my compost, like basics? I think it depends on what your situation is. Like if you're in an apartment, like a lot of people are in this college town, and you don't have a backyard, I would recommend starting with like a vermicomposting bin. And so the things you would need is like 2-gallon buckets, 10 minutes on YouTube, a drill, and some worms from a bait shop. But I think if you have like a yard or something, then maybe something more like Mary's. What materials did you use to make that?
So we pretty much just used old pallets to create a structure and then nailed them together. The one thing with that is that with our sort of system, you're going to need a lot of just on-hand browns. So all of the leaves that were collected in the fall are kind of in various spots around. So just having that on hand is important. So it's basically just something to create a box, grounds, space,
Yeah. And I think an important thing a lot of people feel like they need to get started is like kind of the how-to.
Yeah.
Composting is one of those topics that's really well covered on the great interwebs. I think we're also going to do an episode about composting. Is that next week?
I don't think it's next week. Next week.
Oh.
Next week. Next week we're talking about reduce, reuse, recycle in the kitchen.
Oh yeah, next week we're actually building a vermicomposting bin on the street. But if you just Google like how to make a compost bin, or if you want to do the worms because you don't have a backyard, that's called vermicomposting, VERMI composting. I know on YouTube for the worms, that's the one I know about. There's a guy called Green Shorts that I really like, who does multiple different systems depending on the size you have of room and how much capacity you need.
Do you need to build like a composting bin, or can I just dig a hole in my backyard and start throwing food scraps in there?
You can. Yeah, you can do like an in-ground compost system. With that, I mean, it's still definitely something that you want to make sure that you're balancing. It might be much more difficult to get the compost out like that. So if you're just wanting a way to return it to the earth, that could be a good option. But if you're wanting to like use the compost, it's going to be harder to scoop it out of the hole in the ground. But yeah, plenty of people, if you just like dig a dip and then you can throw stuff in there. I'm not sure, I think there's a term for that, but I'm not really sure what it's called. Whole compost, I'm not.
That's an apt description, I'd say. Okay, cool.
No, I like that because it makes the earth whole. Oh.
Okay, I'm gonna throw out the question in the chat one more time. If anybody else has any more questions, go ahead and throw them on there. And if I don't see any in the next minute or so, I guess we'll wrap things up.
So, do you, Mary, want to talk about what we're doing next episode? I know I talked about the vermicomposting thing, but do you want to talk about kind of the theme?
Yeah. So next week for our second episode, we're gonna be doing how not to recycle. Ooh, controversial, spicy. So we're basically going to be talking about like, okay, we get it, we know what recycling is, we know it's not that great, or we'll talk about how it's really not the best option, and then we're going to talk about how to incorporate reusing things and reducing in the kitchen and in your life as well, and kind of like different things like that, and then talking about the worm bin, tying that into you could say that like composting is a form of recycling, so maybe using recycling when needed, and also in using that word in ways that doesn't necessarily mean putting it in a bin and having Howies come and pick it up. So yeah, that should be really fun. We did want to send out, if you're watching the stream right now, we wanted to ask folks to send in pictures or examples of, maybe things that they've done to like reused maybe unconventional things around their house from the kitchen or with their kitchen. So if you want to send in pictures of that, we'd love to have them and then put them up on the screen. Like the classic example of what we were talking about was like using yogurt bins for Tupperware, or all sorts of things, maybe around the house, outside, whatever. Send us your pics.
Okay, cool. I put the email link in the chat, so hopefully somebody sends a couple of those. Oh, man, I'm losing my ability to speak, but that's probably normal.
Or Or if you know somebody who would be a good example for that, text them that email and say, hey, these people want to see cool reusing things. Because I feel like people get really excited about stuff like that, to share it, to be like, ooh, look at this.
Yeah, like nominate your creative friend to, I don't know, I can't think of, I need like a really awesome example. I'm sure we'll see some next week of how people reuse things, but if you see anything, send it our way.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. Well, I don't see any more questions. So, man, yeah, your webcam just does not want to play nice for me. But that's neither here nor there. All right, cool.
See you guys next week.
See ya.
Thanks for tuning in.